regime in Afghanistan and in Iraq, and is a pillion passenger of American policy, the passenger who rides behind the driver of a motorcycle. In its review of the London bombings, Britain's MI5 Internal Security Service concluded that though they have a range of aspirations and causes, Iraq is a dominant issue for a range of extremist groups and individuals in the UK and Europe, while some who have traveled to Iraq to fight may later return to the UK and consider mounting attacks here. The Blair government angrily denied the obvious, though it was soon reaffirmed when one of the suspects in the follow-up failed bombing, captured in Rome, claimed the bomb plot was directly inspired by Britain's involvement in the Iraq War, and described how the suspects watched hours of TV footage showing grief-stricken Iraqi widows and children alongside images of civilians killed in the conflict. He is alleged to have told prosecutors that after watching the footage, there was a feeling of hatred and a conviction that it was necessary to give a signal, to do something. Reports by an Israeli think tank and Saudi intelligence concluded that the vast majority of foreign fighters in Iraq are not former terrorists, but became radicalized by the war itself, stimulated by the invasion to respond to calls to defend their fellow Muslims from crusaders and infidels who are mounting an attack on the Muslim religion and Arab culture. A study by the Center for Strategic and International Studies, CSIS, found that 85% of Saudi militants who went to Iraq were not on any government watch list, Al-Qaeda members, or terrorist sympathizers, but were radicalized almost exclusively by the coalition invasion. Since the invasion, the report confirms, Iraq has become one of the global centers for recruitment and training of extremist, neo-Salafi Islamist terrorists. Large numbers are likely to return to their countries of origin, carrying terrorism skills and radicalized worldviews, gaining publicity and credibility among the angry and alienated in the Islamic world, and spreading terrorism and violence. French intelligence, which has unique experience over many years, concludes that what the war in Iraq has done is radicalize these people and make some of them prepared to support terrorism. Iraq is a great recruiting sergeant, contributing a new and enormous jihad zone to train people to fight in their country of origin, as intelligence had previously found in Afghanistan, in Bosnia, in Kosovo. U.S. officials report that Abu Musab al-Zarqawi, al-Qaeda's top operative in Iraq, is bringing more and more Iraqi fighters into his fold, displacing foreign fighters, who account for less than 10% of the insurgents in Iraq. Perhaps as few as 4%, CSIS believes. According to terrorism specialist Peter Bergen, President Bush is right that Iraq is a main front in the war on terrorism, but this is a front we created. As the Iraq War has expanded the terrorists' ranks, he reports, the year 2003 saw the highest incidence of significant terrorist attacks in 2 decades. And then, in 2004, astonishingly, that number tripled. In response to Donald Rumsfeld's search for metrics to know if we are winning or losing the war on terror, Bergen suggests that an exponentially rising number of terrorist attacks is one metric that seems relevant. Studies of suicide bombers also reveal that Iraq appears to be playing a central role in shifting views and as ground zero in a new wave of suicide attacks. Between 1980 and 2003, there were 315 suicide attacks worldwide, initially for the most part by the secular Tamil Tigers. Since the U.S. invasion, estimates of suicide bombings in Iraq, where such attacks were virtually unknown before, range as high as 400. Terrorism specialists report that stories of the bravery and heroism of suicide bombers in Iraq are stimulating imitators among Muslim youth who adopt the jihadi doctrine that the Muslim world is under attack and they must rise to its defense. Former NSC staffers and counterterrorism specialists Daniel Benjamin and Stephen Simon conclude that Bush has created a new haven for terrorism in Iraq that escalates the potential for Islamic violence against Europe and the United States, a policy that is disastrous. We may be attacked by terrorists who received their training in Iraq, or attacked by terrorists who were inspired, organized, and trained by people who were in Iraq. Bush has given them an excellent American target in Iraq, but in the process has energized the jihad and given militants the kind of urban warfare experience that will raise the future threat to the United States exponentially. Robert Pape, who has done the most extensive studies of suicide bombers, writes that Al-Qaeda is today less a product of Islamic fundamentalism than of a simple strategic goal: to compel the United States and its Western allies to withdraw combat forces from the Arabian Peninsula and other Muslim countries, as Osama bin Laden repeatedly declares. Serious analysts have pointed out that bin Laden's words and deeds correlate closely. The jihadis, organized by the Reagan administration and its allies, ended their Afghan-based terrorism inside Russia after the Russians withdrew from Afghanistan, though they continued it from occupied Muslim Chechnya, the scene of shocking Russian crimes dating back to the 19th century. Tolstoy's novella Haji Murad is all too timely today. Bin Laden turned against the United States in 1991 because he took it to be occupying the holiest Arab land, a fact later cited by the Pentagon as a reason for shifting U.S. bases from Saudi Arabia, and because Washington blocked his efforts to join the attack against the secular enemy Saddam Hussein. The jihadis also joined the Muslim side in the Balkan Wars, with U.S. tolerance and assistance, at the very same time that they were trying to blow up the World Trade Center in 1993. An Indian strategic analyst and former government official alleges further that the London bombers received training in Bosnia. In the most extensive scholarly inquiry into Islamic militancy, Fawaz Gersh concludes that after 9/11, the dominant response to Al-Qaeda in the Muslim world was very hostile, specifically among jihadis, who regarded it as a dangerous extremist fringe. Instead of recognizing that opposition to Al-Qaeda offered Washington the most effective way to drive a nail into its coffin, by finding intelligent means to nourish and support the internal forces that were opposed to militant ideologies like the bin Laden network, the Bush administration did exactly what bin Laden hoped it would do: resort to violence. The invasion of Iraq created strong support for the fatwa issued by Al-Azhar in Cairo, the oldest institution of religious higher learning in the world of Islam. The fatwa advised all Muslims in the world to make jihad against invading American forces. Sheikh Tantawi of Al-Azhar, one of the first Muslim scholars to condemn Al-Qaeda, and often criticized by ultra-conservative clerics as a pro-Western reformer, ruled that efforts to stop the American invasion are a binding Islamic duty. The achievements of Bush administration planners in inspiring Islamic radicalism and terror are impressive. The senior CIA analyst responsible for tracking Osama bin Laden from 1996, Michael Scheuer, writes that bin Laden has been precise in telling America the reasons he is waging war on us. None of the reasons have anything to do with our freedom, liberty, and democracy, but have everything to do with U.S. policies and actions in the Muslim world. Scheuer notes that U.S. forces and policies are completing the radicalization of the Islamic world, something Osama bin Laden has been trying to do with substantial but incomplete success since the early 1990s. As a result, it is fair to conclude that the United States of America remains bin Laden's only indispensable ally. From his detailed study of Al-Qaeda, Jason Burke draws a similar conclusion. Every use of force is another small victory for bin Laden, he writes.